There's a little cottage industry in the astrological world where we will send people to Tahiti or Paris or something for their birthday with the idea that you can have a better chart for the year if you're in a new place. Let's look at that carefully. There's some truth in it, but I also want to be a bit cautious about it and certainly not imagine it to be a major technique, because it really isn't. It's based on the solar return chart, which is a chart set up for the very moment that the sun returns to the place it was at the instant of your birth. Because the calendars are a bit arbitrary, because there's some averaging and smoothing out with the calendars, this does not always correspond to the day and the minute of your birth 37 years later or 42 years later. Sometimes your actual solar return can be the day before or the day after, and it's almost always at a different clock time. So we set up a chart called a solar return chart that does bear rather significantly upon the tonality of the next year of your life. That's a valid technique. I tend to pay more attention myself to transits and progressions and solar arcs, but the solar return chart is an interesting thing, and I set one up for myself every year. Now, my feeling is that chart gives you the most accurate and deepest information if you set up the solar return for the place where you were born. There is a subsidiary technique where instead of setting it up for the place where you were born, we set it up for somewhere else on the earth. And then the notion is, well, where on the earth might I be where this chart looks the best? Where I am the luckiest, where I get rich, where I fall in love. And this is the idea of the relocated solar return chart. Again, I want to be careful here. I do not want to dismiss this idea. There is a certain usefulness in it, but it's so important that we keep perspective on it. And a slightly different territory, but fundamentally the same. Sometimes people will say, well, what if I move to a different place? Not just for my birthday, but I moved to Chicago. I was born in Denver and I moved to Chicago. Will that change my birth chart? And the answer is no. The answer is you will have, through that relocated chart to the new city, something like permanent transits, is how I often put it, a kind of influence that is unique to that city and will bring out different features of your character. But all that is superimposed on the birth chart. The deep logic is you can't change your karma by moving. There are no geographical cures to the fundamental spiritual or evolutionary issues of your life. That's the fundamental premise. And so, once again, with the solar returns, I think that if you set it up for your birthplace, that's where the heart and soul of the information is. But by going somewhere cool for your birthday, you can add a subsidiary, secondary influence to it. I would just end by imagining somebody who was eager to make money, not the world's most original motivation, but of course a very common one. And so they move to a place where Jupiter is on the cusp of the second house in their relocated solar return chart. And in fact, they make another $1,142 that year compared to what they would have made if they hadn't gone to Tahiti, or wherever they had to go. But of course, it cost them $2,800 to go to Tahiti. I don't mean to be totally cynical about it, but we are talking about a relatively minor influence. Look at that relocated solar return. It's interesting. It will teach you something, but never allow it to eclipse the importance of the solar return that is set up for the place of your birth. That's the one that tells the deepest story, the real story. So I would certainly recommend that you start there. And then if you're interested, go ahead and see what your solar return looks like wherever you happen to be. And if you're really interested in this, go ahead and go to Tahiti or wherever for your birthday. It's maybe that's its own reward. I would recommend going to Tahiti over Camden, New Jersey, though, just to keep perspective on all of this.